Welcome back to another edition of the Knight Report podcast. I'm your host, Mike Broadbent. Joining me once again is my co-host, Richie O'Leary, and founder and publisher of Inside the Black and Gold and the co-host of the Shell and Tell podcast, Ahmed Ghafir. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, appreciate you guys having me on.
We're going to get into everything inside this Rutgers-Maryland matchup this weekend and more. But first, we are sponsored by Knight and Day Apparel. Hey, Rutgers fans, get ready to slam dunk your style with Knight and Day Apparel. If you're on your Scarlet Knights this season with exclusive Rutgers gear, from trend-setting designs to lifestyle garments, we've got everything you need to support your team in comfort and flair. Stand out in the crowd and show your passion for Rutgers basketball with designs that celebrate every dribble, dunk, and victory. Use our promo code RutgersRivals to get 10% off your purchase. Don't wait. Head to Knight and Day Apparel today and get ready for game day. Go Knights. We're also sponsored by BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to live in-game betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch games as they happen. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA, college basketball, NHL, UFC, and MMA. Head to BetOnline today and get on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline, the game starts here. So, Ahmed, Maryland's been coached by Michael Locksley for I don't even know how long, 5-6 years now. There's been some ups. Year 6. There's been some ups. There's been some downs. How does the fan base in general feel about Locksley in year 6?
I'd say coming into the season, there was definitely an appreciation, kind of for Maryland. One, getting to bowl games in 3 consecutive years, but winning them. That's the first time it's been done in program history in over 20 years now. So just I guess the inherent appreciation for kind of making the program better than what it was when he took over. That's there, but I think obviously, like we said, year 6, you're kind of looking to take that next step in the program, and I think a lot of fans, when they look at the preseason comments, when they say we're ready to compete for Big Ten championships, and you go out and lay an egg against Northwestern at home, Michigan State at home, those types of performances kind of where the fan base is a little bit thin. And frankly, when those losses happened this year, the calls, the anger, definitely got a little bit louder than it did in years past. So I'd say right now, it's kind of figuring out a way to really kind of get back on the right side of it. Kind of getting coaching dynamic, all that, the changes that happened midseason, kind of get that smoothed over. But I think that this has probably been the toughest season for Maryland since Locksley's first season as head coach.
Let's talk a little bit about quarterback. For the first time since 2019, I think it was, that Talia's not there. Billy Edwards, hot start to the season, kind of tapered off the past couple weeks. What kind of quarterback is he? What does he bring to the game? And did he kind of just outright win this battle immediately?
Yeah, I'd say, I wouldn't say he outright run it immediately. It was kind of throughout the offseason, him, MJ Morris, and a little bit of Cam Edge, even though Cam Edge, he's departed from the program since the USC game last month. But, it was kind of, maybe a little more of a 1A, 1B between Billy Edwards and Morris. Morris, really just kind of coming in and maybe the more athletic option, but, just trying to get the offense down, get the playbook down, become a master of the offense and the concepts, I think was kind of that big thing. And then for Billy Edwards, he did a really good job. I think it was always clear that he had a lot of support from fans, obviously from fans, but most importantly from the locker room, from his teammates. And I think that, once fall camp rolled around for that first scrimmage, that sentiment, that mindset around, what Billy Edwards means to a lot of the other guys in the locker room was really clear. And, kind of coming into the season, Locksley kind of joked about it, but, kind of had a reputation just kind of as a running quarterback, just kind of previously just how he was used. I think this year he's kind of been stepped into more of a game manager role. Like you said, he really started the year on a good note, and it was really all because of his efficiency. Reading the defense well, staying within himself, not trying to force too much. I think those were all things that he did a good job of in these last couple of weeks. Part of it is, of course, on the offensive line, which arguably has been the biggest weakness for Maryland this season. But last week against at Oregon, had a strip sack, fumble that turned into a touchdown, had 2 interceptions in the fourth quarter, one of them being off a tip pass there. But again, I think that the efficiency, once that started to tailspin for him, Maryland's numbers started to dwindle a little bit more.
So you guys have had a similar season to Rutgers. Rutgers started 4-0 and they've gone 1-4 since. You guys started 3-1 and have gone 1-4 since. What has been the main struggles you guys have seen in that stretch where you've gone 1-4?
Yeah, I'd say obviously. I mean, the big thing again for Maryland is the offensive line. I mean, that's kind of been a weak point for Maryland this year. Kind of coming in, having to replace all five starters. Andre Roy was a guy who had some tackle experience with the program last year. Isaiah Wright was a guy who came in, actually previously played at Rutgers, transferred over to Buffalo, was kind of expected to be a guy that could potentially, either a tackle, maybe center, but possibly kind of bolster that offensive line. He went down on his third workout since arriving in June. So the offensive line, trying to get those five guys together, three portal guys. The left guard Isaac Bunyan, converted defensive lineman, who's kind of was expected to be kind of a boost and run in the run blocking game, which still has been a problem for Maryland. So that's kind of been the biggest thing. But then there's also just the consistency aspect. Obviously, penalties have been an issue here and there. It's kind of gone down a little bit the last couple of weeks. The last week's game was a little bit sloppier. But again, I think it's more just tied to, well, kind of similar to what Loxie said. When the offense is playing well, the defense has kind of struggled, and they've been able to get, even at Virginia, were able to get a score in the last couple of minutes of the first half, and then only to get back in the game, only to allow Virginia to get back on the scoreboard within the last minute there. So I think that the consistency on both sides of the ball really hasn't been there in Big Ten play.
I know you said the offensive line's been struggling, but it seems like the run game's been pretty solid so far between a veteran in Hemby and then a true freshman in Nolan Ray, I believe. What does that kind of 1-2 punch bring to the table?
Nolan Ray, he's a redshirt freshman. He suffered an injury last year in one of the first games of the season and missed. So, but yeah, I mean, Ray's a guy that you kind of expect to kind of have that big playability. Probably he's not disputed. He is the fastest guy on the team. And then Roman Hemby, obviously, just kind of being that alpha dog. The running back room that hit is struggling with a little bit of depth. Colby McDonald, who was arguably the most efficient running back. He's out for the season. His time at Maryland's now over with following an injury. But I think the run game, there's been spurts. There's been times where Maryland, when they needed to run the ball in some of these maybe short yardage situations, they're able to. But the chunk plays on the ground really haven't been there since really the first couple of weeks in the season. Indiana, Roman Hemby had a 75-yard touchdown run to tie it at 21. But you haven't seen a ton of the big plays on the ground, the complementary balance that Maryland kind of looks for. So again, Roman Hemby and Nolan Ray, they've had their flashes for sure, but I wouldn't say that there's been consistency on the ground yet.
So despite us playing in the same conference, it's funny how we've only had two common opponents so far this year, and we've both played, I think, 5 or 6 conference games each. We got our doors blown off by USC. You guys were able to squeak out a win versus USC. You guys got your doors blown off by Minnesota. We were able to squeak out a win versus Minnesota. Talk about how both those games went. I know that there was a big time win at the end of the game against USC, but just talk about like what happened in those two games and maybe why they look so much different than our results.
I'll tell you what, that Minnesota game for Maryland was not pretty. So I mean, Minnesota that Gopher defense did a really good job just kind of shutting down Maryland. Really wasn't able. Billy, again, we talked about the efficiency from Billy Edwards. That was another, at the time, was a season low in completion percentage for him. So there was definitely some work to kind of close that gap. MJ Morris was able to come in to close that fourth quarter, and he looked great. I believe it was 119 yards, 7 of 8 passing, 1 touchdown. Had a couple of great deep balls that Minnesota did have a couple of their starters in, but again, Maryland just really could not stop or could not move the ball against that Gopher defense when it needed to, and then again, fell down 21-0 in the first quarter. One of it was because of a pick six, another fourth down that was stopped that Minnesota turned into a scoring drive there. So that hole, Maryland got themselves in a hole they just could not climb out of. Loxley and very obviously easy answer, but Maryland's just not at the point where you can spot teams, especially on the road, like these kinds of points. And then USC, that was a little bit similar at times. The USC was really able to kind of control the first half a little bit, and Maryland really turned the tide. Levain Scruggs came down with an interception midway through the third quarter. It was a 2-possession game. USC was driving, whether it was going to be a field goal, whether a touchdown possible, but chance to really extend the game, blow the game open a little bit more. Levain Scruggs came up with that interception, was kind of really a momentum changing play, and Maryland was kind of able to claw its way back, lean on the passing game. And I think that was probably, I mean, even, it's hard to say, obviously with Maryland being 4-5 overall, it's been a tough year, but you can say that there was, at the time, maybe a season-saving win, just with it being at homecoming. Obviously, the way that this season had gone for the couple weeks prior, the letdown against Indiana, although Indiana has really proved a lot of people wrong since then. But losing to Michigan State at home and the way that they lost at home. So I think kind of all of it together for Maryland to kind of be able to stage that 15-point fourth quarter comeback. I think that was kind of the emotional win that they needed. And something that I think they're definitely trying to replicate this weekend.
What is it about this Maryland wide receiver room that it just seems like year after year, Dante Demas, Corey, Raheem Jarrett, now Ty Felton, Caden Prather even's having a pretty good year, that they just are able to find or develop talent at that room every single year? Is there a specific coach? Is it just Mike Loxley? Is it the offense?
Yeah, I'd say, something, obviously just covering recruiting too, the one thing that you hear a lot on the trail is that, especially from coaches, from players, the Mike Loxley offense, the skill players, they know that they're going to get the ball, that they're going to get their production. You look at a guy like Ty Felton, former 3-star out of Stonebridge, out of high school. He was a guy, it's been well documented now, but he was a speedster, and then he suffered his season-ending injury in his junior year. Virginia Tech was the school that he wanted to go to. Virginia Tech said no. Maryland kind of stayed true to their evaluation, and something that Maryland does a consistent job of. They don't let high school injuries really derail their evaluation. Obviously, they'll bring you in, look at kind of make sure everything's good. But if they recognize that you're that player, then you're that player. And Ty Felton, really bought into that. And he's consistently. I talked about Nolan Ray being the undoubtedly the fastest guy on the team. Ty Felton was definitely in that top 3, top 5 alongside him in that group. So I think it's just kind of all been 2 years ago, he had those flashes. Obviously had a bad fumble to start out the Michigan game, I believe, in 2022. But the game-changing speed from him has kind of always been clear. And then Caden Prather, he's a guy. Maryland was all over in high school, and he was probably him and Jordan Addison were top targets for Maryland back in the day. And I think this was kind of a situation where Maryland really kind of needed that complimentary big man. And once Prather left West Virginia, went into the portal, Maryland pounced, and that was done pretty quickly. So I think those two guys, I think they were always kind of expected to be the alpha dogs when they came in. Even last year, they were expected to be big pieces in the receiving game alongside Jayshon Jones, who's now with the Minnesota Vikings. So I wouldn't expect, especially wide receiver, I wouldn't expect that to be a position that Maryland struggles to recruit or attract talent under Mike Loxley.
Let's shift over to defense. Sometimes stats can be misleading. You guys are 123rd in passing defense, 25th in rushing defense. You already kind of talked about penalties. You guys seem to you're pretty good at taking the ball away. Where would you say the strengths of the defense lie? And are those numbers fairly accurate, or are they not telling the full story?
I would say that it does paint a pretty accurate picture, except for the takeaway. I would say that was kind of more. Maryland was on the plus side of the turnover margin really the first couple of weeks in the season. I believe they led the country for the first 3-4 weeks. But again, I think the last couple of weeks Maryland hasn't really been able to generate those turnovers. Rather, they just had interceptions, fumbles, whatnot. So I think that's kind of been an area where Maryland's trying to get back on that ledger. But I think kind of coming into the season, the strength of this defense was especially the front seven. The question mark was kind of the secondary. A lot of pieces just trying to figure itself out, and a lot of inexperienced pieces in the secondary trying to figure itself out. But I'd say right now, again, it's kind of that front seven, even though it has been a little bit disappointing, that there is some firepower along the defensive line, having a veteran trio and Tommy Akingbasote, Tyzay Johnson, Quayshawn Fuller, coupled with Jordan Phillips, who's kind of had a little bit of a disappointing year as kind of that interior defensive tackle. But again, I think the linebackers, they kind of had their flashes as well. the strength of the defense should be the front seven. It hasn't been week in, week out. There's been some lapses. Ruben Hippolyte, fifth year senior. He's kind of had up and downs fifth year as well. So the front seven is kind of where the confidence really sits.
Defensive line, how much of a push are they really able to create up front? I know obviously Wyatt is a fierce force on that edge right there. I think it leads the team into their 3 sacks, but for the rest of the defensive line, are they able to create a push against some of these other Big Ten teams?
Krishan Fuller, he's kind of had some flashes as well. Tommy Kingbasote a little bit. He's kind of been able to generate some pressure in the backfield. The Krishan Fuller, I think, has kind of been the big piece. But kind of coming into the season, Donnell Brown was expected to be kind of a big guy where he was expected to, kind of create havoc off the edge, and haven't really seen a ton of production from him after what was a productive year one for him. So I think Maryland, they kind of expected to have some other options. Neo Avery, former 4-star from Good Counsel, previously weird to think that he played quarterback, but now the guy that trying to obviously entrench himself in that rotation there. But I'd say there's kind of been flashes, not consistency.
Gotcha.
Yeah, kind of. I'm looking into the stats even more now. You guys are 107th in sacks, 74th in TFLs. Is it just like the talent not putting it together? Did you guys have success early on and haven't had success since? Like, it's frustrating as a fan sometimes where the strengths are just not performing. Like, we have those areas too. Is that kind of what you see? Is they're just not able to put it together?
I mean, the first couple of weeks, just the front seven, especially, the defensive line, having some veterans, this was, a couple of years ago when Loxley took over, it was clear as day what needed to be fixed, rebuild the trenches, both sides of the ball. And this was, you're at that point for Maryland fans where Tyzay Johnson, Tommy Kingbasote, both local guys, both guys that, fans have become familiar with just from the local ranks, just coming up in the program. But you kind of look at this year as kind of having that veteran presence, and you think that, you can kind of take that next step. And it hasn't all come together. Even against UConn in week one, the Huskies were able to kind of generate a couple of chunk plays on the ground, and were able to do so for about 2.5 quarters. So it was there have been some concerning signs. Virginia as well. There were flashes where Maryland's defense was able to shut down and completely stifle the Who's rushing attack and frankly offense in general. And there were plays where they were able to giving up the chunk plays. Mentioned the first half score there. So this defense no doubt has not consistently put it together for 60 minutes yet.
I know you talked about the front seven, but secondary, you brought in a transfer in Husky. I think there's a freshman, Brandon Jacob, playing a lot too. What are they kind of like this year so far?
Jalen Husky, he's playing a little bit more safety these last couple of weeks, but that's kind of been a little bit more due to injury. Also part more to kind of where he's best fits. But again, Dante Trader and Glenn Miller, both those guys that are kind of the 1A, 1B as that free and strong safety there. Glenn Miller just being a real dog inside the box, probably Maryland's best tackler, and Dante Trader just has great range, great athleticism, and kind of that last blanket of defense for this passing defense. But again, you mentioned Brandon Jacob. He's a guy. He's been battling a little bit of injuries these last couple of weeks. I believe since the USC game, if not Minnesota. But he was back at practice this week, so I expect him to potentially get back into the rotation there, especially with it being at home. More likely that he's available. But Levain Scruggs, I think he's a guy that has kind of really entrenched himself in that safety rotation, the guy that, kind of 1A, 1B to Glenn Miller, where he's trying to come up a little bit. So I'd also expect to see a lot of 13 on Saturday too.
If there was one guy on your defense, you had to say, like, the defense needs to go make a play, who's that guy across the entire starting line?
I would probably have to say Kellen White right now. I would maybe Quayshawn Fuller, just because those guys have kind of maybe been the most productive for Maryland this year. Kind of, when they need to get that pressure, those two have kind of been the main guys that have been able to do so. But again, I think there's, I think if you're looking at the passing attack, it's Perry Fisher, who's undoubtedly Maryland's top cornerback right now, and an inexperienced cornerback room. I think that's kind of really been the biggest issue for Maryland, and something that was probably the biggest surprise against Oregon last week, making the Ducks offense obviously they were able to score, but slowing them down a little bit. But Barry Fisher, I think he's a guy, if you really need to slow down a team, that's kind of, you need him to step up and be that alpha dog.
We've seen the Terps special teams obviously win them a game, but they have 2 blocked kicks on the year. They have a pretty damn good punter based on numbers, and a solid kicker as well. How much of a factor has that been this season?
Maryland hasn't been a threat to create an explosive play when they are in punt formation. You kind of seen obviously some teams been able to kind of capitalize. You talked about the second block, or one of the first block punt actually was Indiana. I think it was about a minute change left in the game, and full disclosure, Maryland was had a lot of injuries that game, and at that point they were just trying to get bodies in to close it out, and it didn't go well. So, but yeah, I mean, special teams has been kind of an issue. Obviously, Bryce McPherson, you mentioned him being able to come in from Notre Dame, and he was a guy that once he signed with the program was expected to be a big piece, whether in the punting game and being able to flip the field and kick off. But again, Maryland really hasn't shown too much potential to break off a big play in the punting game, and I wouldn't view Maryland as a threat until they prove to. But 6 years of Mike Locksley, haven't seen it yet.
So if you were designing a game plan to attack the Maryland offense and the Maryland defense, where would you focus? Where would you try and isolate guys or position?
Yeah,
groups?
I mean, again, I would try and obviously take away the passing game as much as possible. Take away the deep balls for Maryland, which is something that has kind of been a struggle for Maryland. But just trying to get the balls in to their skill players in space. That's kind of been their MO. But if you're Rutgers, you kind of try and take that away, make Maryland beat you on the ground, which frankly they haven't been able to show that they can do over the season so far.
And how about on defense? Where would you target on defense?
Again, I think, kind of coming off last week, I think the secondary has kind of done a good job of taking away the big plays. I think Oregon only finished with 1 pass over 20 yards in their win. But again, Maryland, in the weeks prior, the depth, especially at cornerback, is kind of a concern. Michael Mormon, who really didn't play too much, but he was a guy in that cornerback room. He was the 4th player to depart from the program this week, so that depth is a little bit tested there. So I would say, especially with Glenn Miller, Dante Trader, but those guys back to 100%, but still coming back from injury, getting acclimated. The passing tech has kind of been the bread and butter to beat Maryland so far this year.
So I want to go back a little bit towards the offensive line, because we have this debate on the boards like every year, and it's like there's no way a D2 guy could play at the Big Ten level. And Alan Heron is coming from shorter D2 university. Would you say he's a certified Big Ten offensive lineman, and where does he rank 1 through 5 amongst the starters?
Yeah, I would say it's been a work in progress. Kind of getting up to speed is kind of the big, like just the Big Ten plays, the Big Ten pace of play has kind of been the big thing for him to kind of just, get acclimated. And, there was a lot of talk earlier this offseason that, he could potentially be an NFL guy, but he'll need 2 full seasons. And I think that's kind of, you're starting to see, just kind of him developing, getting his feet wet a little bit more, getting his strength to be able to block some of these Big Ten edge rushers. I think that's kind of the big thing. So, 1 through 5, I probably put him as a 2 or 3 right now. I'd say Josh Kaltenberger has done a pretty good job there at center.
So I think we've kind of gone through every unit on the team. Let's get into some predictions now. Ahmed, how do you see this game playing out? What's your score prediction?
I think, the last couple of years, I think this has been, it hasn't been close, but I do think it's going to be different this week. I think obviously both teams looking for bowl eligibility, though, you can make a pretty easy argument that Maryland has a little bit more fire on them, just kind of with the lack of opportunities to get 2 more wins, especially coming back home for the first time since the USC game. I'm rocking with Maryland 27-21 over Rutgers.
How about you, Rich?
I go back and forth. I feel like I say this every week now because I don't understand this Rutgers team. Like 1 week they're good, 1 week they're bad. 4 weeks in a row they're bad. 4 weeks in a row they're good. So very weird Rutgers team this year. The 6-point spread, I think it's going to be less than that. I think Rutgers will end up covering, but I think it's going to be very close. I'm going to say 24-21 Maryland, but I think there's a potential for Maryland to also completely explode on offense. And with Rutgers injuries, they could arguably take them to the woodshed once again.
Yeah, I'm so tossed and turned on this game because if you would have asked me before the Minnesota game, I would have said Maryland wins by 20. But I think Rutgers showed a lot of good things in that game where they've gotten their pass rush back.
Mhm.
They had forced a season high 4 sacks last week. They had 16 pressures on Minnesota. You guys having those offensive line struggles, that's a plus for me. But the negative is you guys run a wide open offense with explosive skill position guys all over the field. So I don't know if Rutgers will be able to stop that. I'm just going to go with history here. Rutgers hasn't been able to beat Maryland with any consistency under Mike Locksley. The only win we've had under Greg Schiano 2.0 is that COVID game where we went to overtime. That doesn't really fully count in my opinion. So I'm going to say Maryland wins this game 24-20, but I could see it being a Maryland win by 17. I could see it being a Rutgers win squeaking it out. I think it all depends on, whose strengths win out. Is Rutgers pass rush able to stifle the passing game of Maryland? Is Rutgers able to take advantage of your secondary? I'm going to be hesitant to see it. I'll believe it when I see it, I'll say. So I'm going to go 24-20 Maryland. Ahmed, we really appreciate you hopping on here. Usually one thing we do before we let our guests go is talk about NIL. What's the NIL situation at Maryland, and is that something that's a constant source of pain for fans? I know you guys have the Under Armour connections there, so you might have a big money backer. But how's NIL going overall?
Yeah,
in Maryland?
it's we're probably in very similar boats here, but Maryland is football and basketball.
Mm-hmm.
Basketball, you're not at the point where you're able to just kind of throw money at guys and just smooth things over. Football is the same. You gotta have the philosophy of getting guys for the right reasons. If it's money first, you can't do that, and part of that's also just kind of nature of the NIL, the transfer portal era. You kind of have to have that philosophy a little bit more. But Maryland from an NIL perspective, doing a little bit more. Kevin Blank. Every single time it feels like, when Maryland needs someone to step up, it is Plank. Maryland is kind of able to build on the Under Armour. It seems like they've gradually started to build on it more and more. You just keep hearing, wait to see, what the guardrails, what the rules and regulations looks like before you go all in. But it does seem like, Under Armour does a lot more with the players to kind of get them more involved, more visibility these last 6-9 months or so. But it's no doubt NIL, One Maryland Collective for Maryland fans has been the sore spots.
Last one I got for you. Our fans on our boards are always talking about how this is a rivalry game, and the Big Ten now considers it a rivalry game. It's going to be played every year. Number one, it's kind of stupid. It's not in rivalry week, which besides the point. Number two, they want a trophy. Do Maryland fans want a trophy? And if you had to pick a trophy, what would it be? Because we've debated everything from the state of Delaware, a blue claw crab, 95, the interstate sign. So I mean,
yeah, it's. I think it's come up every once in a while from Maryland fans. I think obviously there's the inherent Maryland wants to beat Rutgers, and just kind of obviously both of them coming in the Big Ten. So I think Maryland fans always kind of acknowledge that rivalry, I guess, so to speak. But I guess if we're putting a trophy together, I think from the Maryland side, whatever it happens, as long as there's a crab cake involved, I think we'll be okay with that.
Perfect.
And do Maryland fans kind of feel the same way as we do, where we both, we view Penn State as like Satan, and we kind of don't really have like a lot of animosity towards Maryland, maybe more so on the basketball court than on the football field. Do you guys have the same feeling where you just hate Penn State and Rutgers is kind of like,
Yeah, Penn State, especially on the football side, they the way that Franklin recruits, it's bread and butter is still part of is in the DMV. So there's definitely that rivalry and that bad blood between them. But I would say Duke kind of Duke was kind of that initial rival for Maryland when they were in the ACC, and it feels like fans still hate Duke, but Penn State's just kind of quietly been their Big Ten replacement. So I think that's kind of you don't be hard pressed to find a Maryland fan to say something nice about Penn State.
And I forgot the Franklin connection where he was the OC coaching waiting at Maryland. He kind of spurns you guys to go to Vandy, and kind of the rest is history.
Yeah, no, it's that's definitely its own chapter in the book for sure.
I got one last one. I lied. Can you give me some kind of hope that Deonte Banks can turn it around? Because he is so lost out there, and it's killing me. It's killing all the Giants fans on the message boards. It's just, it hurts.
I'm
Give me
surprised.
some glimmer of hope,
I
please.
saw a couple weeks ago he was getting some criticism for lack of effort, and kind of that's pretty surprising. That's something that he was kind of always did a good job of, and I think that's kind of Maryland doesn't have too many first round picks, so I think a lot of Maryland fans are definitely hoping that he can kind of turn it around too. But hey, they saw the 2 touchdowns that he allowed against Terry, so I think there are some Maryland fans who are okay with it for at least 1 week.
Yeah. Damn.
All right, Ahmed, thanks so much for joining us. Where can our fans find your content and find you on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. You can always head over to insidetheblackandgold.net for all your coverage covering Maryland football, basketball, recruiting, non-rev. You can find us on social, Inside Black Gold on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And you'll get your most in-depth Maryland coverage out there.
All right. Well, we appreciate you joining us. Rutgers fans, thanks once again for listening. For me and Richie, this has been another edition of the Knight Report podcast, signing off.